We're taught that that rat race in pursuit of success is what makes us valuable and worthy as humans. We ask children, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we ask adults, what do you do? Those two very things. Because if you are not producing and aiding in the capitalism in which we live in,
Yeah.
specifically for the economic gain of the powerful and wealthy, then you are nothing to this world, to this particular society. You are worthless. And we fall for that. We fall for believing that our entire purpose in being on this planet is to work in that capacity. And if we're not working in that capacity, if we're not pursuing that, if we're not chasing that, then why are we here? Because we don't believe that our existence is enough.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and or listening to my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And today I have a very interesting guest, Carolyn Sumlin. And Carolyn, I'm reading from the cover of the book is out now, but I got this reading copy from your publisher. So forgive me, everybody. It's a real book. Does the cover still look this way, Caroline? Yeah, there's the real book. So we both got a copy. And you just mentioned you're living in Virginia. I'm in Massachusetts. Ernie, our producer, is in some godforsaken place that's like 120 degrees in the middle of a desert. So I don't know whether he'll live through the program, but we'll try and see if he does. Listen, I just read your book, We'll All Be Free. And I'm going to read the subtitle here, How a Culture of White Supremacy Devalues Us and How We Can Reclaim Our True Worth. And I've got quite a bit underlined here, stuff I want to pay attention to. But before I get into it, I just want to sort of make a general comment. And that is, it was such a relief to read a book about a very serious subject, but by someone who hasn't been infected with the academic disease of being afraid to put in personal information. I love the biographical memoir aspect of this. I love the fact that you talked about reconsidering your role as a mother after having had children. And, when I read that, it tied in with a lot of my own work, which has to do with understanding not only are we on a journey, but just this idea of things I've written in the past, for instance, where someone asks me a question and I'll sort of do a double take and say, did I say that? And 20 years later, I've reconsidered it. And I love the fact that you reconsidered some things in this book. So that's a roundabout way of just saying, I really like the book and thank you for writing it. And I enjoyed meeting you through the book, as well as learning what you think about your subject. But if I had to pick, the parts I like best are learning who you are and your struggles and everything you've been through. And I thought it was very well handled, not maudlin at all, no self-pity, but at the same time, a really interesting story and told lyrically and in a really lovely way. Having said all that, I want to read a quote from the book from page 79, which I think sort of gets us into a kind of overarching theme. And you write this so beautifully, I want to share it with people listening to this podcast. A crazed society that is highly addicted to stress, perfectionism, and burning the candle at both ends, with a people who tie their productivity, socioeconomic status, education level, ability to maintain an unnatural and unrealistic Eurocentric standard of beauty and unhealthy levels of self-sufficiency to their intrinsic worth as human beings. Surely this is enough to make anyone experience the immense amount of grief and self-doubt. I thought that was really brilliantly put. So let's start there, because I think your subtitle is good, but if I would fault it for anything, it's about so much more than that, because you've got a real life philosophy here that has to do with parenting and work and children and our priorities. And, we share that. As a grandfather who's been the principal caregiver to 3 grandchildren for the last 14 years, I literally just cooked them lunch, finished doing the dishes, came in here to do that. You're homeschooling. You talk about you being a parent in here. I talk about my grandparenthood. We're so much on the same page in terms of where our lives are at, except different stages, because I'm 71 and you're a younger mother. Other than that, I feel a great kinship to you. So as you keep assuring your readers in the book that they're in a safe place, you are too. I love the book.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear that. I'm so glad that you liked it, and I'm glad to hear that the memoir aspects were something that helped to connect you to the book and to myself, and make you feel safe in the reading, and as I hope does for everyone that has the opportunity to read the book.
Yeah, and I think particularly, coming to the book as a sort of a white member of the patriarchy who's 71 and lived through the whole era you described from a completely different point of view than my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the first thing I reach out for in a text that's so challenging to me is, where are the points of commonality? And, if you and me were stuck on a desert island and we had to raise my grandchildren and your kids together somehow because we were shipwrecked, we would talk about the subject of your book or some of the subjects of my book, but pretty soon we'd be down to the basics of, how do we take care of these kids? What do we want to teach them? I love that model of behavior that you had with this wonderful daughter of yours who's looking at you and wants to be a mother and a writer and do all this stuff you're doing because she's seeing you as the model. And I thought, that was such a brilliant and gentle thing, but also brave, and in a way braver than some of the more what would seem like the more not radical but tough statements on racism, because in this milieu where jobs, work, money, career, academic credentials define us, that's what we look for, to be able to say, yeah, look, I'm raising my child in a way where part of the behavior she's modeling is the fact that I invest a lot of effort in motherhood. So this will be a very weird place to start, but let's begin with the fact you're homeschooling your kids. I'm fascinated by that. Tell me about how you got there, how old they are now, and what's going on.
Well, my children are 6 and 4. I have two girls. And yes, we're still homeschooling. In fact, this is kind of the time where I'm getting ready to gear up for the next school year. So it's been very interesting to juggle both the release of a book and gearing up for my daughter's first grade year, my eldest daughter's first grade year, which is actually the first year where the state I live in, which is Virginia, really begins, looking at what you're doing if you're homeschooling. So lots of things on the line. But there's a lot of reasons why I came to the conclusion of homeschooling, but what it really boils down to was observing my children and seeing what was best for them and what kind of world I wanted to raise them in. And I'm doing a lot of reflecting in the way in which I was raised. And I make it clear in my book, I have a chapter on school. And, but in that chapter, even though I'm specifically talking about the way that our school system in America is infiltrated in white supremacy, as is every other institution in our society, I make it very clear that I am not anti-school. I'm not anti-public school, private school. However you choose to send your children to school. I am, in fact, have 5 years of public education experience, which I don't think I mentioned that in the book. But I was a public educator for 5 years and actually never thought that I would come to the conclusion of home educating my children. I think that, for a lot of reasons, school can be is such a necessary thing for our children. But looking at my children and their specific needs and their specific habits and learning styles, it brought me to wanting to create a world for them where learning and exploring and being themselves was the only thing that they had to worry about, was just being able to rest in the beauty of their humanity and all of the ebbs and flows that comes with that. And knowing that where that coupled with some specific needs that they have, I knew that they weren't going to be able to get that in this stage of their life if I was sending them to school. So I could go into many other reasons that, specifically talking about the system of education and things of that nature, that yes, I do, those play into my reasoning, but right now it just comes to wanting to honor the humanity of my children and make sure that they didn't have to worry about what their limitations when it came to their approach to education, and that comes in many different forms, be it behavior, grades, interests, things of that nature. And that's kind of where the homeschooling was birthed from. To answer the other part of your question, how is it going? It is a beautiful, wonderful, and challenging experience all in one. Some days I'm I'm like, why did I do this? But most days I am, this is why I'm doing this. And knowing that even though it is a large sacrifice and privilege at the same time, that it's 100% worth it. But it definitely, I resonate with you saying, you fixed lunch and then you came to do this podcast. I did the same thing. I fixed lunch. I ran upstairs, slapped on a face of makeup, and my kids know they get iPad time whenever I have a podcast episode to interview for, and they get excited about that. So they get their 1 hour of screen time, and I'm doing this, and then I'll snap my fingers and jump back into that. So it can be challenging, but I'm also so glad that I get to do this work, and my children get to watch me and see they're not limited to one role or the other as they grow and sort of think about what they want their life to look like. And that's the root of it. I want their humanity to not feel limited, but limitless.
Yeah. And by the way, I'll do this interview the way you're supposed to. Sooner or later, I'm going to come around to talking about your other work and your books, who you are and all that good stuff. This is Frank Schaeffer in Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And I am talking today with Caroline, who has written this book that I love. And it's called We'll All Be Free, How a Culture of White Supremacy Devalues Us and How We Can Reclaim Our True Worth. The next thing I want to do is jump into the back of the book and read some of your solutions. But before I do that, let me just pursue this thought a little further with you. It's interesting. The only grudge I have about this book is that I didn't read it before I wrote my last book 3 years ago called Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, in which one of the things I talk about is that, in fact, one of the best full years of my life was when we were stuck at home, quote unquote, in COVID. And I'm not diminishing the fact other people had a horrible time, but my 3 grandchildren were out of school, and my wife, Jeannie, and I were Camp Schaeffer. We were it. So they live across the street. My son and daughter-in-law had to live in their house and work out of their house, but we did all the childcare, and I renovated our barn with my grandson. I taught all 3 of them to cook. We spent time out in the garden gardening. We grew a whole year of crops and picked them and ate them and cooked them together. By the end of the year, they had all had cooking lessons with me every day. They had all been in the barn doing carpentry with me. We got the reading done. We did all sorts of music stuff we did together. And part of the barn was to get 3 easels and build them a studio. I don't mean like a lavish thing, but a spot where they could have all their artworks. So the funny thing is, I was so sad for me personally, when that year ended, because then it was suddenly back in the world you described so well, of this kind of meritocracy of effort. And, people don't come up to you and say, who are you? They say, what do you do? And by that, they don't mean, tell me about your kids, your homeschooling, your life, who you love, what you care about. They mean, are you important? And so you and I really have come to the same conclusion, I think, about life that I get from your book. We're so much on the same page about this. And I just want to mention that because, I think if I was in your position right now, I'd be doing very much the same thing you are, very jealously guarded time with children or grandchildren, because A, you can't get it back. And B, I think the people who are most involved do a better job. I found with our own kids, we did some years of homeschooling, but then we learned something that obviously you already know because you have 2 kids and not 1. And that is, each child is very different. And sometimes what suits one doesn't suit the other. So coming up with the program is good until it's not. I don't know what you think about that.
100%. I mean, every child is different. And I always say, specifically regarding homeschooling, that we will do this until it doesn't make sense anymore. And we'll see what happens year by year. You really do have to take it year by year and kid by kid. My focus is my 6-year-old primarily. And my 4-year-old is still getting homeschooled right along with her sister. But it is still preschool. So right now she's not mandated to attend school, and any schooling that she would get, I would have to pay for. And believe it or not, that was one of the, first drivers of our decision to even homeschool. When I first started, it was about the fact that it was right before the pandemic. We had not declared a pandemic, but it was 2020, and I was looking into preschools. I had just moved to a new city within the same area, but a new city, and I was looking into preschools for what was my then 3-year-old, and I was like, I am not paying you guys $500 to teach my children ABC 1, 2, 3 when I've already taught her that. So I decided to just go ahead and homeschool for preschool just to save money, and it turned into a realization in the homeschooling that I explained already for when it was time to decide whether she would attend public school. But again, I, am homeschooling my youngest daughter. At any point, as they change, as their needs change, mature, interests differ, learning styles adapt and evolve, or what have you, the decision could definitely change. And I always want to make sure that people understand that parents that choose to homeschool, or at least I say this for myself, I can only speak for myself, choosing to homeschool doesn't necessarily mean that homeschooling is the answer. That this is that if you don't homeschool, you are not doing your children, or you are doing, excuse me, if you don't homeschool, you're doing your children a disservice. You're not spending enough time with them, or you're not doing this, or you're not doing
Yeah.
that. There's
Yeah.
so much of that in our society. In this, you have to do it a certain way, otherwise you are trash. And I'm going to
Mhm.
tell you all about the reasons why you are trash, and you need to do it like me in order to not be trash. And we need to throw that away as a society,
Mhm.
and start realizing that every single person in the human that they are has varying needs, and those needs are going to change per season. And whatever that means for you is what it means for you. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm very much in alignment with you in that things definitely change, and I could be in a season of homeschooling that makes sense
Sure.
for a few years, and then that could shift into a public school,
Mm.
or some other form of education that I don't know yet and won't know until I get there.
Yeah, I found with me, it wasn't so much the kids, it was me, in that,
That too.
Jeannie and I got pregnant when we were 17 and 18, and we've been
Mm.
together 53 years now, and we're grandparents of 5 grandchildren now. So we're in a very different phase of our life. But, excuse the language here, but I'll be blunt with you because you are honest in your book, so you deserve bluntness in return. But I grew up in a fundamentalist evangelical home where my father became a very famous evangelical leader, and patriarchy was instilled in me in the sense, God, this is how God wants it. Men are in charge, the whole package. Okay,
Right.
the whole Calvinist worldview that you talk about as leading in other instances to racism. By the way, I lived in apartheid South Africa for a year and knew a lot of white Calvinists out there. Then this was after I had left the faith, so we can talk about that over a cup of coffee sometime. But anyway, the point being with me is I brought a lot of anger with me out of my childhood. And you talk about your childhood in terms of not feeling worthy and adoption and all the rest of this. I found that the better part of me was saying, I get too angry with these children, and I don't want to homeschool them. My wife was doing the work, but I would intervene harshly sometimes. I don't mean crazily horrible things, but just I was at a period of change in my own life to the point where the way I was treating them really reflected on the fact that I had been raised, and this is the language part, to be an asshole by divine right. God has put me in charge. Children must obey me. My wife should do what I tell her. And my life has been a learning curve on that path. Now, my 3 grandchildren all come running down here. I get up in the morning feeling down sometimes, and my 15-year-old granddaughters just texted me and said, I haven't seen you for a whole week. Will you take me to lunch? These are my best friends. But at the time that I was trying to homeschool kids your kids' age, when I was in my late, because I had kids in my teens, so I'm in my 20s at that point. I just decided they deserve better. And we've got to find another way to do this because I don't trust myself. I'm too much of a jerk, too much of the time. So that was it wasn't like, what do the kids need from education? It was like, they need a better teacher than me, because in a non-teaching environment, there was less conflict. Now we can just have family times. When I tried to do some of the teaching or back my wife up, I wasn't ready to handle, on top of being the authority figure in the family. Now I'm their teacher.
Right.
And
Right.
it was like, I was just too immature and stupid.
I mean, I think that's such an important reflective moment that you had, and being able to realize that, recognize that, and make an alternate choice
Mhm.
is something that a lot of people in your situation still wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
They would have justified why they should continue to behave a certain way or make a certain
Yeah.
choice, especially rooted in that ideology of this is the only way, this is what is right. So it must be done, and ignoring those warning signs of the harm that is being caused.
Yeah.
So you were doing a lot of the work that I even talk about in the back of my book. We're
Yeah.
recognizing those harmful systems in your own home. Doing that before that was really even a topic of conversation, which is huge. And I think also to the point of homeschooling and being around our children as well, and recognizing dynamics in our household and what's working and what's not working. I do also talk openly with my community online specifically about how there's a lot of things with homeschooling that are unnatural, and I do think spending too much time with our kids also can have
Sure.
a big fault. And the thing with our society though is that we've come away from that collective community helping each other village mindset, which as humans we're meant to live in, right? We make our adults work for and pay for and figure out how to have that village and have that help. And the teachers that are such an integral part of a parent's village, right now we're in the midst of an education crisis where teachers are fleeing the classrooms and leaving our schools half empty, and administrators scrambling to fill those roles. This is what we've done as a society. We've made it so difficult for us to raise our children, as the saying says, village to raise a child. We don't have that village, and that is really difficult. So I kind of went a lot of places with that, but I think just to bring it back home, number one, to again, like, applaud you for that decision that you made, but number two, to also emphasize, like, there are definitely times where, you may realize that something is not working, and the ultimate goal is to ensure that our children are able to be raised in the fullness of their humanity and the best that works for them. And as parents, that we're able to exist in the fullness of our humanity in the best way that works for us. And so that can look differently in many different households. And I'll be completely frank here as well to say, like, for this particular year, I wasn't going to continue homeschooling had I not found a couple of alternative solutions. Thankfully, we live in a time where homeschooling is becoming a little bit more popular, and it's no longer just like that Christian thing that's done with a couple families here and there. So we do have paid for homeschool enrichment classes that I'm able to, thankfully, and understand the privilege in being able to do this, invest in, so that my children kind of have the best of both worlds and have a hybrid solution. And I have that much needed break that I need for myself, because I can definitely see myself having some similar situations where I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling burned out. I don't have a village. I don't have anyone I can lean on. I feel that pressure from white supremacy and patriarchy and perfectionism to do it all myself. And then I end up taking that out on my kids, and therefore causing more harm than good, in doing the exact opposite of what I was intending to do with this homeschooling solution that we have. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I want to change gears here and get deeper into the book. Let me just say to anybody listening to this that if you want to get the book or get in touch with Caroline Sumlin, will all be free, is for sale now. It just came out. And we are going to link to it everywhere, so we don't have to keep saying it's on Amazon where books are sold and all that, because we're going to make it easy for everybody to get the book by linking to it everywhere. Toward the end of the book here, you have what dismantling will look like. We've discussed what it looks like when the various tenets of white supremacy show up within our institutions. Now let's talk about antidotes to those tenets. So we have physical examples of what it looks like to change the system. So I'm just going to read the first part of each subhead: patriarchy, antidotes. The antidote to patriarchy is sharing power, as well as equally valuing both masculine and feminine characteristics, energy, and traits. And then we're going to go back through these and talk about them, but I'm going to do them all first. Ableism, antidotes. The antidote to ableism is the eradication of perfectionism and every other closely associated characteristic. Capitalism, antidotes. In an anti-capitalist institution, labor is no longer exploited for the gain of the powerful, and humanity is never ever placed after profit and productivity, period. Heterosexism, antidotes. Here, there are no gender or sexual orientation norms, and no one is othered. Yes, even in faith institutions. And then you have in italics, especially in faith institutions. Racism antidotes. In anti-racist institution, anti-Blackness is destroyed. Blackness and one's proximity to it does not equal threatening, ugly, unintelligent, inferior, or any other infuriating racist ideas that shaped our world. Whiteness is not the standard. I repeat, whiteness is not the standard. And then you have a little line down here under that. You can do this. We can do this. I firmly believe we were born for such a time as this. And then under freedom, you just put the fight has started with us. So that's the conclusion to a book that takes us through some of the history of racism, its sources in both theology and American history, slavery, and so forth and so on. You know the ending of your book better than I do, though I've read it and underlined it. And so I'm going to ask you to kind of elaborate a little bit on those sections toward the end of your book in terms of your own life experience. You talk about it takes a village. Well, obviously, we can't do any of this by ourselves. This has to all be community too. A big point that I've been writing about is the whole finding in evolutionary science now that it's never been the survival of the fittest. It's always been the survival of the friendliest. In other words, those who learn to cooperate get ahead. Those who don't fall by the wayside. So actually, the cooperators are the evolutionary subspecies, if you want, that whether it's a small community or a big one. If you can't cooperate, you're going to die. And that comes right out of our hunter-gatherer background in the Kalahari that we all go back to. So I just want you to think about these subheads. If you want to open your own book and look at those, if you can't do them off the top of your head, I can never remember anything in my book. So let's talk about them, because I think it takes a village to get any of these things done, whether it's a mother and father with kids or whether it's a church community or individuals. Do you just want to take us through these and talk a little more about the community aspect of how we can pull together to achieve some of this stuff? Because it would be tough to do as an individual.
Right. Yes. 100%. And I think that's the one thing that if I could shout from the rooftops for someone who has read this book and their mind is sort of swimming with all of the things that they've learned, and they're just like, okay, I want to start, but I don't know where to start, and this feels overwhelming, and I can't do this myself. It's 100% not meant for you to do alone. And it's also something where I think when we think about changing the system, we see, activists saying we must dismantle the system, we must change the system, we must get rid of it all and just throw the baby out with the bathwater and start over. It's that language, of course, the urgency in the way that's phrased makes sense, but we're not actually talking about it in the sense where let's just kick the door down and start over, because that's not really realistic. And so the way that I write it is a way that I hope people will read it and feel like this actually feels tangible. And it's encouraging people to look at in their lives just the different smaller spheres of influence that they can think where they can begin to do some of this dismantling. And by that, I mean starting in your home, starting in your family, beginning to have family conversations with your partner, if you have one, with your children, with your roommate, even whatever that could look like for you, and reflect on, well, am I exercising a form of patriarchy in my household? Am I exercising any sort of ableism in my household? And begin to run through that list and reflect on that and say, maybe I am not giving my children enough of a voice because I still hold this mindset that I'm the adult, so whatever I say goes. And I'm not allowing them to walk in their power, and I'm not helping them with that. Maybe I am demanding perfectionism. Maybe I'm a supervisor, so shift from the household. Maybe in my job I'm a supervisor or a team lead of some sort, and I'm leaving very little room for humanity to express itself when I'm working with my what is it called when you're a supervisor and you have people? Sorry, I haven't worked in corporate in a long time. People below you're not really below you, but the people that you oversee, your colleagues. Maybe I'm not giving room for humanity, and I'm not being understanding, or I'm not showing people that the fact that they're people still comes before the work that we're doing, and just taking little little steps that actually have a lot bigger of an impact than what you would think. Same thing with your groups. If you have friend groups, if you belong to sororities, fraternities, church groups, book clubs, whatever that could look like for you in your life, and just begin to say, am I treating people with humanity over profit, or am I treating them as profit over humanity? Am I unknowingly perpetuating white supremacy culture because this is something that we have normalized and is the air we breathe in our society? And how am I doing that? And how can I begin to just make those intentional shifts? And as far as not doing it by ourselves, well, that's where you have those conversations with, again, your partner, maybe a teammate at work, or whomever else you can, and say, hey, this is something that I'm noticing. I would like to make a change here. I would like to take a look at our norms in the workplace, our norms in our organization that we're a part of, and see how we can make some shifts. Can you partner with me on that? And so we can begin to change the culture over time. And that's the key word. It is an overtime thing. We can't, again, just kick the door down as much as we want to. We can't, because things do take time to develop. You have to think about how long it took for us to get to where we are. We're talking about a 400 plus year history alone just of the United States, but white supremacy also starts before that. Colonization goes beyond the formation of the United States and the formation of the modern Western world. So we have to really be realistic of how long it took us to get to where we are in the first place, and understand that the work that we do and those little steps that we take are going to have a huge impact. But we also have to recognize that we are going to be doing some baton passing as well, and hopefully setting up a foundation of success for the next generation to come and take it and go even further and even further. I do believe that work will have that ripple effect as well, because when people realize that they are now being prioritized as human beings, when they begin to work with you and be in community and relationship with you, and your mindset has changed and your attitude has changed, and you begin to treat them differently and say things differently and allow for grace. It could be something even as simple as the way that you respond to an email, right? The way that you write an email. One of my friends, she's actually a fellow author. I love the way that she responds to an email. She says, when you have, when you are able to work from a place of rest, I will appreciate your response when it works for you or when it's convenient for you, versus, please get back to me as soon as you can, period. I need this by Monday, right? She's so intentional with the way that she writes her emails, and immediately comes at it from a place of, your humanity is safe. I recognize that you may not be able to respond to this in 30 minutes, the way that we demand so much urgency in our society. Those simple shifts really have a remarkable impact on people that will then encourage them to be like, hey, what happened here? Why are you changing? Oh, okay. You learned about this. Let me begin to make some of those shifts too. And I do believe that ripple effect will begin to have a generational impact.
Let me shift gears here a little bit. First of all, this is Frank Schaeffer in Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. My guest is Carolyn J. Sumlin. Am I saying that right? Sumlin?
Sumlin, yes, Caroline J. Sumlin.
I'm saying it right. Okay. And you're a speaker and a writer. I should talk to you about other things you've done and all that, but this is, we're having too good a conversation you can read her bio somewhere else, because we'll get to that. Let's just keep talking for a minute here. The book is We'll All Be Free: How a Culture of White Supremacy Devalues Us and How We Can Reclaim Our True Worth. And it's just been published by Baker Books, which brings up my next question. I'm always upfront with guests and tell them sort of where I'm coming from before I ask them a question that has to do with that same issue, so that, they know who they're talking to. So, you can clearly see where I'm coming from. I have journeyed not just out of the evangelical community, but out of Christianity itself in a very basic sense. And that is, I simply do not believe the theological claims are true. I don't think the things happen that the theology says happen. And I also think the results have been rather mixed, to put it mildly, which you get into a little bit. I'm being a little facetious there. But that's aside for a moment. And so I don't want this to look, I've told you that, so I can tell you this is not a loaded question. You make some allusions that make me think you are still within the Christian community in some way, which is fine. And you're with Baker Books, which at least back in the day, was an evangelical publisher. But your book is not really a Christian or an inspirational book in the sense that's usually meant. It's just a book, and you happen to make some reference to Christianity. So that's what the book, have I said that correctly?
Yeah,
Did I
exactly.
put it right? Okay.
Yep, you got it.
So anyway, but what makes me curious is then you personally and where you're coming from. So like my snapshot, the last little book I wrote appertaining to what I believe was an answer to a lot of questions I got from my memoir, Crazy for God, and all sorts of people wrote to me, other authors and others. I got sick of answering the question, well, what do you believe now? Because it was about my, growing up in an evangelical home, becoming a figure in the religious right. My father with Dr. Sievert Koop and Ronald Reagan, founding the pro-life movement and then moving beyond that and so forth. And I finished the book up kind of with my ambivalence. And my atheist friends were saying, well, why aren't you one of us? Why don't you say, you're this? And former evangelicals, the few who would still have called themselves friends, or at least people who were writing me emails were saying, how can you have given up your faith and so forth and so on. So I wrote a little book called Why I'm an Atheist Who Believes in God. In other words, talking about the family tradition I had of getting up in the morning and praying for my children and more recently my grandchildren, but at the same time on an intellectual level, really having given up the faith altogether. And understanding that my attachment to spirituality was on an emotional and nostalgic level that I needed. So, when a friend of mine who is a famous atheist, Christopher Hitchens, the author, once said to me in a phone call, why do you say you still pray when you don't necessarily believe in God? And I said, well, that's how my mother raised me. You got a problem with that? As in, hey, we all have our own psychological baggage. I can't pretend to be somebody else. And so that's a way too long of a question, but I just want you to feel really free in ranging over the subject of what your faith journey is now, where you are this little snapshot, this moment in time, knowing that you're moving forward and changing as well. So nobody going to hold you to anything, but if you had included a chapter or a little section in this book, or if the publisher had asked you to talk more about where your head is at in terms of spirituality and faith, I'm just curious as to who you are, because thankfully that's not what the book is about. You deal with your subject. You just allude to faith. But I'm curious on a personal level, just like I was about children and homeschooling, who are you in that aspect today? Not, and what's the journey been like?
Yeah, I love this question. Let me start by saying that when I learned, which has been a very recent journey within the last 3 or so years, I learned the truth about evangelicalism in this country, didn't even know what fundamentalism was, and learned about how white evangelicalism is essentially some of the if not the most fuel for white supremacy in this nation. I was gutted. And that really impacted and began my transition into a more of a deconstructing faith journey that I would say that I am on now. I used to be very much now see, let me back up and say this. I was raised in the Black church. I love the Black church. The Black church is so much more than just a church. When we say the Black church, we mean a community. We mean the institution that has been the safe haven and safe space for the Black community since the plantation. And so it's so much more than a religious experience, the Black church. That's what I was raised in. And being raised in the Black church, I didn't know anything about evangelicalism. I was just raised in the oldest Black church in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is where I'm from, and enjoyed my experience there and just kind of came to know God in sort of the he loves you and he's for you kind of way. There were not too many, my mom wasn't super religious. There wasn't like a lot of rules. I wasn't raised in that. All the things that I'm learning about, like fundamentalism, like what y'all went through, I didn't know that existed. I had no idea what that was. When I came out of college, I discovered kind of accidentally, though, more of that like modern white evangelical world by stumbling into a church that basically was a Hillsong church. And kind of, and I write this in the book. One of my wow moments in my deconstructing journey and in my dismantling white supremacy within myself journey that I've had to go through was when I realized the idol that I had placed white worship on. I thought that the white presentation of worship and the church was superior to the Black church, really just because of the way that it looked and the way that I had throughout my entire life had placed whiteness on this pedestal, which is what we are trained to do in this world. So I did the same thing with my faith. I walked into this church, the lights blinked, I was allowed to have coffee, everyone wore skinny jeans, and I thought, well, this is way better, and why can't Black folks do it like this? And I'm gonna go here because this is so much cooler, and allowed myself to essentially begin being fed what I didn't know then that I know now is the evangelicalism theology that you're speaking of. Did not know what it was, but it was a completely different way to look at the Lord. But I really kind of fell into it and believed it and assumed without question that everything that I was being taught was correct. And I just took it at face value and believed and allowed myself to believe some pretty harmful things and to endure some pretty harmful things within the environment that I was in, but continued to justify it for years until I kind of had that moment where things started to not sit right with me and my own understanding and deconstructing of white supremacy and realizing the role that it played in the church and began to make those connections. And where I'm at now is kind of it's I don't even know how to answer this question because it's yes, consider myself a believer. I still believe in God. He has not given me a reason not to believe in him. But much like yourself, everything that I've been taught, everything theologically speaking, what I've been told or how I've been told to interpret the Bible, how I've been told that, you never question the Bible and the Bible is, face value, it's truth. It just, it is what it is. And you listen to it this way and you respond to it this way. And this scripture means this and nothing else. That's where I'm in a big fat question mark and trying to figure out for myself, what's up really, what do I really believe? And in doing so by doing my own research, my own historical research. But I don't have an answer. Like I can't actually say, this is what I believe. This is what I believe about the Bible. This is what I believe theologically. All I know is that I choose to continue believing in God, because I do believe that God has carried me through my darkest times, and I still love God and love Jesus, and that's literally the only answer I can give. I don't know if that really answers your question. But I definitely, in fact, I feel like I need to read your book because I think that might help me a little bit, in that, because it's been a difficult journey to really all of a sudden uproot what I believe to be a spiritual foundation that I had kind of spent 10 years making and believing in my marriage and my kids and the way that I was building a home. And I've had to completely uproot that and start over. And I'm real fresh in that starting over and also doing a lot of healing in some of the harm that was caused and the beliefs that I had, and also realizing how most, if not all, of what I had believed to be true as far as the theology is concerned was rooted in racist ideology. So now I'm like, I can't believe that anymore because I know where that comes from now, and that's hurtful. So now I have to figure out, well, what is truth?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm glad you were saying, well, the answer is not the answer, because these are all, like I said, when I asked you the question, I said, this is just a snapshot of today. I've been writing for 40 years, and one of my least favorite kinds of emails, speaking from emails, is when someone asks me a specific question on a quote from a book that's 30 years old. First thing is I do is like, did I write that? What are they talking about? Because me 30 years ago isn't the guy sitting here today. I'm not saying I'm better or worse. It's just different.
Right, just different.
You allude to that here when you talk about some of your certainties here. You put, oh, the toxicity, exclamation point. I'm cringing at my past self. Join the club. That's like 90% of my feelings about everything.
Yeah.
I should actually just put that up on my wall here. You say you're going to read my book. I think I'll copy that out and just put, oh, the toxicity, exclamation mark. I'm cringing at my past self, except I wouldn't put past. I'd cross out past and just put, present day as well, because there's so much you want to work on that. And then you say, but it gets worse. And then you talk about how you changed your view of sort of being this hyperactive, productive parent, influencing other people and trying to have your kids at the same time and writing a book. And all I was able to write in the margin is been there, done that. I mean, this was, you got it. And you kind of sum it up a little earlier saying, I was not willing to allow being a mother to halt my lifelong rat race pursuit of success. And of course, that could be a father or a grandfather or male, female, trans person, gay, straight. It wouldn't matter what your activism was, even if it's a quote, good cause. If if you kind of leave the human behind, well, then what's the point? And I think you make that point very well in the book. Do you want to talk about that a little more, or should we move on to some other questions?
I mean, we absolutely can, or we could do either one. I mean, I think. Well, number one, I hope that, your listeners are able to read the book, because I think even though I'm sharing a very specific story for myself, as you are able to, coming from a very different background and perspective, still be able to say, well, been there, done that. And I think everyone will more than likely be able to reflect on a time where, out of fear, right, we're taught that rat race in pursuit of success is what makes us valuable and worthy as humans, because we live in a society that says, well, if you like you mentioned before, and I put this in my book as well, we ask children what do you want to be when you grow up, and we ask adults, what do you do? Those two very things, because if you are not producing and aiding in the capitalism in which we live in, specifically for the economic gain of the powerful and wealthy, then you are nothing to this world, to this particular society. You are worthless. You are as good as a dead deer on the side of the road. Like that's how we view people, is very much in correlation to what are you producing and how are you making our economy, work for, like I just mentioned, work for those people. And we fall for that. We fall for believing that our entire purpose in being on this planet is to work in that capacity. And if we're not working in that capacity, if we're not pursuing that, if we're not chasing that, then why are we here? Because we don't believe that our existence is enough, or believe that anything that we do outside of monetary work.
You sum that up very well. I'm going to quote your own book to you. Talk about an asshole by divine right. And I'm going to quote your book to you here. You say on page 99, there is no standard for being human. There is no standard measure of culture. There is no standard measure of learning. There is no standard measure of intelligence. And there is no standard measure of achievement. Everything you have been told you have to measure up to was created by a society with a very specific agenda. And that agenda only cares about what your level of production can do for their bottom line, regardless of what it does to your humanity. It is not you, it's them. I love that. By the way, if I was your publisher, that would be on the cover of the book, because I think in a funny way, I mean, even though white supremacy is what you're following through the book, if someone said to me, what's the book actually about? That's it, because what's the end product of the white supremacy you're talking about and the capitalist system? The problem is not with the white supremacy. The problem is the dehumanization it has caused, not just to the Black population, but to everybody.
Right.
Because that is all of us. What you've described there is not just what Black people are stuck with in America. It's what we're all stuck with. That's the description of our culture. And that could be on the back of my last book as well. You and I have been thinking along absolutely similar lines. Not that I've done a study on white supremacy, but when it comes to that bottom line result, I really love that paragraph, by the way. It's so well written and succinct. I want to change subjects here a little bit and sort of look at the thread of white supremacy in your book. There were areas where I was making notes in the margin, and I'm not going to turn to them all here, But where you talk about white supremacy in sort of general terms, and it seemed to me two things. First of all, I think that since white supremacy and Christianity are so allied, it brings up a real question about the validity of Christianity. It also brings up a real question about the inherent racism of almost the entire story of the Jewish people in the Old Testament, wiping out entire tribes, men, women, and children, and anything that got in their way. And then later when they wrote the story down saying, yeah, but God told us to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is racism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just, as you well know, racism is not just about color differences, it's ethnic, it's all kinds of things, religious wars and all the rest. So that's one point I wanted to make. I really think that at some point on your journey, you've got to look at that. And then I'm going to make a point that I talk about a lot in my podcast, but also just my general commentaries when I'm on TV and so forth and so on. I warn people and I say, look, you have to see the years of Trump and the fact that 83% of white evangelicals voted for him, and the white Christian nationalism. I never just say Christian nationalism. I say the white Christian nationalism, because I would not include the Black church in that, the white Christian nationalism that has become essentially a fast track to an American form of fascism. It goes far past capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to wish we just had the old capitalists back again if we keep going in this direction, because we're heading for a really fascist situation in this country.
Yes.
But that brings up a bigger point that you do not address in your book. And I'd like to talk with you about it now and see if it's because you haven't gotten there in your thinking. Maybe you disagree with me, or maybe it's something you'll look into in your next book or not at all. But here's my thesis, and that is that the American situation with white Christian nationalism, the Trump years, is really part of a global phenomenon moving towards theocracy and away from democracy and representative government across the board. Saudi Arabia and the Wahhabist Islam mullahs there, Iran, girls being locked up in prisons and raped because they wanted to take off their headscarves. Vladimir Putin siding with the Russian Orthodox Church and getting the bishops to bless his war of conquest. Poland in hunkering down into kind of a white Roman Catholic traditionalism that fits right back into their sympathy with fascism in the 30s. Hungary, the same. Italy, Meloni, the female prime minister of Italy now, is a hard right person who grew up admiring Mussolini. On and on you go. One connection that is in all of these, with the exception of North Korea and China, that are also despotic regimes, is a connection to some sort of religious nationalism. Hinduism right now, Modi in India, Hindu nationalism is the only way he's getting us elected, is increasingly stirring up violence against the Christian minority, the Muslim minority, and all the rest of it. Wherever you look across the globe, there's a pattern. Mm-hmm. And our Trump years are part of that pattern. It has nothing to do with conspiracies and all this nonsense. It's just where the globe is at right now. In your book, you talk about white supremacy. And of course, I would like to see more about the specifics of Christian nationalism in America, because that's a big part of that problem all through history and in the present. I mean, they're the folks that reacted against the Trump years and elected, the Obama years. Trump. But I would also like to have seen a connection that said, look, this is not only a problem of white supremacy. And I'm not talking about whataboutism or moral equivalency. Believe me, I totally get and buy what you are saying. But for instance, if you look at Wahhabist Islam and what the Saudis have been doing to stay in power, and if you look at Hindu nationalism today, or you look what's happening on the West Bank of Israel with the Orthodox Jews taking the land, that, white nationalism, white racism is the problem you say it is. You're telling the truth. And it's in no way lets anybody off the hook. Believe me, that's not what I'm talking about. But I also think it's part of a global phenomena of a rise of an intolerant religiosity across the planet, which at its core is also racist. And so you cannot escape the fact that, the Saudis, who had slaves all the way up until the 1960s, and were the last people to stop doing that. I mean, legally, not that it has stopped globally, but and so forth. You can't duck the fact that Hindu nationalism today, West Bank Orthodox Judaism that's trying to destroy their court system so they can reform Israel no longer as a democracy, but as a theocracy. This is a global phenomenon. So I'm not trying to let white supremacists off the hook, but I'm saying that in the total framework of the human story, sadly, this phenomena is not just about white supremacy. It's a big story that encompasses racism in many cultures for many reasons, but religion happens to be the common denominator. Not one religion, many religions. I just throw that out there as a thought. I've sort of forgotten we're doing a podcast. I'm back. I actually think we're having a drink together and your kids are going to run in and say, give us another hour. Keep talking with them. Keep talking to the nice man. Give us another hour. What do you think? Is this bullshit or am I onto something?
No, not at all. And I will preface, of course, by just saying, as far as my expertise is concerned, my research has stayed primarily within the Western world and within America, just as my niche is concerned. However, I 100% agree with you as far as, well, two things I want to say. We have to remember that white supremacy is also global. It hits every part of the globe differently, and I'm not going to go into all the specifics, and that requires so much more research from ancient times to now. But
Well,
white
a lot of
supremacy,
that, by the way, is in your book, just to let people know when they read it, you're going to get a lot of that history.
right. But as far as globally is concerned, I don't cover it globally, but
Right.
it is something I do want. I always make this disclaimer too when I'm talking to anybody or writing content, to understand that while white supremacy is global, when I'm referring to, I apologize, my air just came on.
Good. This is the real world. My dog will bark, grandchildren will run in. Come on, let it happen.
I feel, but I always feel bad because you can hear that on the recording, on the edit. So I'm gonna try to turn it off if I could just get into my phone and not lock myself out. Oh boy. Come
Our
on.
brilliant editor, Ernie, will know what to do.
Okay, good. Because I know that I can be annoying because it's right here. Like the vent is coming into the
Hey,
microphone. So I apologize.
someone was making a documentary with me the other day, and we went back to Switzerland where I grew up, and there were cows with bells. And they were saying, what are we going to do? All your dialogue has cows over it. And I said, I've made movies in the past. I said, establish the cows. So they had a shot of the cow. And then from then on, we know why we hear bells. It's like the ocean. So we've said, Ernie, we'll leave this in. There's an air
Okay.
conditioner that may kick in. We don't care.
Okay, perfect. All right. So that said, I like I said, I don't mention in my book because it's not where my research is rooted in and where I've focused. But white supremacy is global. Colonization was global. It was not just in America or in the Americas. So I firmly believe that the just the ideology of a supremacy in general, white supremacy being global, but also the supremacy, like you mentioned, of religion, of religious nationalists, things of that nature, is a human problem that we've had since the beginning of time. That I do mention in my book. It is an issue we've had this just terrible thought process that this type of human is better than this type of human. That has been an issue since humans arrived on the earth, and especially since the formation of religion and religious groups believing that because my belief is this, I'm better, therefore I can justify having control of you, having your land, being able to seize, etc., and making you comply to me because we are superior and you are inferior. So I believe what we're seeing now is a culmination of what's been building since the beginning of time. And do I have an answer to that right now? I don't. I don't have an answer to that. But do I track what you're saying and believe that we are in, for lack of better words, trouble? As far as that's concerned, absolutely. And I do in my content talk a lot more. I do have times where in my content online, while it's not as much in my book, talk about the dangers of white Christian nationalism, just bringing it back to America and the Western world. I do talk about that danger that exists and how that has fueled so much of white supremacy, and essentially they fuel each other. What we are seeing in America and what we're seeing, I would argue globally, is when things get stronger, what we're typically seeing is a backlash from those who are fighting for their human or civil rights in any way. So what you're mentioning with women that don't want to wear their headscarves, right? And we see that backlash. What we're seeing here with Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism specifically, and the Trump years we mentioned was that backlash and response to having a Black president for 8 years. What we see historically speaking, anytime we see that rise in that in that violence, in that racist violence, and however it's taking place, it's typically a backlash response to those that were a part of the marginalized group, the oppressed group, the group that has been told they are inferior, demanding to be equal in their rights in some capacity, and then we see that backlash there. And I even end my book there. In my last chapter, I say, I really wanted to be able to end this happily. Like I wanted to be able to give you this, beautiful story about how all we have to do is just hold on to hope and frolic about and do the common good and everything will be okay. But then I ran through this list of devastating just instances of white supremacist backlash that was at the time was what was happening. And even since writing that, so much more has happened. And I told the readers, we're more than likely going to see a lot worse before anything gets better. And that's just the reality of the situation.
In that vein, I thought it was very good that you brought in the war in Ukraine. I'm glad you had time to do that, and your book was being written at a time, because, of course, Vladimir Putin justifies a lot of what he's doing and tries to get support of right-wing, ironically, white American Christians who watch Fox News saying, I'm defending Western civilization,
right,
which is just a dog whistle for white Western, heterosexual, normative, whatever. So, you're right on target. We're going to wrap this up in a minute, but I just want to remind everybody this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, and Caroline Sumlin is my guest, and her book is We Will All Be Free: How a Culture of White Supremacy Devalues Us, and How We Can reclaim our true worth. I have a question for you that I should have gotten to earlier, but this is all just a little bookkeeping here. What are you working on now? What else have you written?
Well, I've written this book, so
Yeah.
I'm working on this book and getting this book in as many
Getting it out, yeah,
as possible, and that's really my focus right now. I was having this conversation with myself earlier today when I was washing dishes, because, as we mentioned before, I am a homeschooling parent.
Yeah.
I am the primary homeschooler, caregiver, all of that of my children in my household, and so I have to constantly be redefining success for myself in the work that I do, because I don't have the capacity that most other people have when they've published a book and they can spend all day, every day marketing that book and being on a million podcasts and staying on Twitter all day and responding to everything. And then as soon as something happens, they have 3 articles they've written in the Atlantic and Medium and everywhere else, and boom, boom, boom. And they're just lightning fast because of that urgency and the culture that we live in. That's not my reality. My reality is I have to take it slow and steady. And my capacity is much, much more limited because I'm a mom, and my children are with me 24/7, literally. So as a result, I am working on one thing at a time. I'm not working on a second book right now. I would love to be able to have the opportunity to write a second book, but before I can do that, I need this book to get in the hands it's supposed to be in, have the impact that it's supposed to have. And I'm just working towards, making that as much of a reality as I can. So I hope that conversations like this are able to aid in that. But I am always writing. I will say that I am a content creator. So my platform is primarily Instagram. I have a pretty significant following there. And the writing that I've done there is probably enough to write a second book. I will say the amount of writing that I've done. I also write articles on my own blog, and my website is relaunching soon because I want to make sure that my content has a place to live somewhere forever. So all the things that I talk about online, where I dive into white supremacy and I create graphics about how it enforces and reinforces the different systems of oppression in our society, how it's impacting you and your self-worth, certain things that come up in culture, in pop culture. Like right now we're talking about the football player Michael, I don't know how to say his last name, but is it or Oher, I'm not sure, who was lied about being an adoptee, and how that plays into white supremacy. I talk about a lot of current events online, and I'm working on taking the things that I talk about online and turn them into articles and blog posts so they have somewhere to live, and people can dive and delve further into that content.
Well, talk to my producer, Ernie, about when we're done here. Stay on the line for a minute with Ernie and talk to him about what we can do for you in terms of things you want us to promote with this podcast. And we'll link to it where it ever, goes. And then if you share it with people, we will. And by the way, anybody listening to this, after you have bought, we will all be free and read it, then get in touch with us and let us, post on my sites as well and just say you've read the book and what you think about it. And then, stay in touch with Ernie and me if you have developments, if you've got some new site you start to do with the book or something you're doing, keep us posted so we can always post it and update our stuff on you too and help out.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate that. I'll take all the help that I can get.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm volunteering Ernie. He's there tearing his hair out saying, why don't you tell her you'll do something? Ernie will fix it.
I love
that. If you stop believing in God, you can pray to Ernie. He'll actually answer your prayers, by the way. Ernie does things.
That's amazing.
He actually does stuff.
Very lucky to have an Ernie. I don't have it.
Everybody should have one, but I don't want them to because Ernie's my producer. He's
got it.
Hey, so look, is there anything else you want people to know that can help you out right now besides buy the book?
If you buy the book and you love the book, please leave reviews on the place where you bought the book from, Goodreads, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever that makes sense for you. That definitely helps. And of course, sharing it with not only digitally with your social media presence or whatever that may be, but also in person if it really impacted you. I will also my website will be launching within the next week, and I'll give you that information.
Well, Ernie will put it all up. So wait, give it to you.
Perfect. On my website, I will have a journal. My book has guided journal questions at the end of each chapter, which is something we didn't cover because I want to make sure it's a personal experience for you. You have to start doing the work within yourself, which is why that's the way that I've written my book, is this first book being a focus on yourself primarily. Yes, we get into how you can work towards dismantling white supremacy in your immediate influence towards the end of the book, but you have to do the work within yourself. You can't do anything before you do that. And so with every chapter, there are journaling prompts, and I will have a guided journal printable that goes along with that on sale on my website, as well as book club discussion questions.
Good.
On sale on my website as well. So if you're interested in doing this with a couple of friends, reading the book, kind of diving into the difficult stuff, I will have resources able to guide you with that.
Yeah, and Ernie, let's hook Carolyn up with our friends at Wild Goose Festival because she belongs there, and get her involved with that and our other connections, Samir and everybody else, and some of our past guests who I think will enjoy your book, and we'll do what we can to help you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I'm really glad that you enjoyed the book. It always feels...
Yeah, I did. And I had all these passages marked out to read, but we actually started talking, but I've got a lot of dog-eared pages all folded down and ready to go here, but it was more interesting talking to you. So thank you for the time. And, your kids' screen time is now 12. They've had 12 minutes more than they should have. So I think they're already ruined. So you can, sorry.
They're enjoying it. They're in a fort playing on their iPads, right?
Yeah. So listen, this was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, keep talking and stay in touch with us so we can follow your progress and keep updating things about you and helping any way we can.
I will. Thank you so much.